Australia's Labour Prime Minister, John Curtin.
I'm happy to be back in Australia. I've seen many things and many places. And although every man can be forgiven for loving his own country best, I believe it is an impartial assessment of the facts to say that I have not seen any country or any people better than my own.
Welcome to Curtins Cast, the John Curtin Research Centre's podcast, brought to you by myself, Nick Dorenfirth, and Redbridge's Cos Samaras. Each fortnight, we bring you the freshest and most challenging conversations with leaders, activists, and thinkers from the world of Australian and global politics, culture, and ideas. Well, g'day. Welcome back to Curtins Cast. I'm Nick Dorenfirth, Executive Director of the John Curtin Research Centre, and I'm joined by my mate, my comrade Cos Samaras. We're now just over 3 weeks past the recent federal election. The fallout is continuing. Cos has recovered from the Democracy Sausage Festival. And Cos, well, firstly, how are you? How are you this morning?
Pretty good. I had a normal weekend, which was a bonus.
Well, the Liberals and Nationals, the Conservative side, the right of Australian politics, they're not having a normal one, or perhaps a very normal one. What's going on? So there's a sort of divorce, there's a separation, there's a divorce, it's on again, it's off again. Tell Curtinists what is going on the Conservative side of politics, because
it's a realisation, I think, by all those involved in that coalition, which has now been, obviously operating as a political force for many decades, that the relationship between the National Party and the Liberal Party is actually very problematic. And it's not necessarily problematic because of the policy differences they now have that emerged after the federal election result, but probably a realisation by particularly those on the Liberal side that relationship is actually one way. It's but to the benefit of the National Party. The problem the Liberals have now is that they have become obviously so isolated by urban Australia that being animated by the National Party on the policy front has actually hurt them. So as we've touched on in previous episodes, they've only got 5 seats that are truly urban outside of Queensland, 10 in total out of 88 across the country. Those 5, that they are situated in parts of Australia which harbour 14.5 million Australians. And there's a realisation within Liberals' ranks that the situation's quite dire and reform is needed. It isn't just about a bad campaign. They are facing an existential crisis because of the emergence of younger voters who've never voted for them and don't plan to do so.
Yes, and this came to a head late last week. Ugly, awkward timing because Susan Ley was dealing with the passing of her mother in regional New South Wales, and David Littleproud and the Nationals decided this would be a good time to bring matters to a head, and they made 5 demands on the Liberal Party, who, a sensible political party, Cos, should take some time out from the election and not commit to policy changes which potentially are locked in for the next 3 years, including the Nationals' demand for nuclear to remain a cornerstone of the coalition's policy armament.
Yeah, look, the Nationals rightly represent, and they represent well, a particular constituency in Australia. That constituency is obviously in regional Australia, and they do a really good job there. But then they should be very careful in how they push around their alliance partner, because that alliance partner is suffering significant political attrition. And unless their partner remedies their problem, both of them are not going to see government for a long time.
That's the essential point, isn't it? If there's no put the Nationals can make any demand under the sun, but without the Liberals being the majority partner in a coalition government, there will be no such thing as a coalition government going forward.
They've got a massive mountains to climb. There's those demographic ones, which we've spoken about, in previous episodes. There is the numerical mountain to climb, which is 30-odd seats they need to win. So 2028 is really out of reach. and is now particularly out of reach because of them basically agreeing to the Nationals' demands. So the ability for the Liberal Party to project a modern political narrative back into urban Australia is limited because they are tied to this party that wants to represent an ageing, declining part of Australia. Now, none of us like to see these regional towns and larger urban centres decline, but they are. And they are very different socially and politically to big city Australia.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a very good argument. I'm not sure if the marriage is definitely officially back on as of Monday morning, Cozzy. There's a very good argument the Liberals, this would actually be beneficial for them. No one's talking about this representing a permanent split on the conservative or centre-right of Australian politics, but they need to go and sort out their affairs. They need to. Andrew Hastie was really strong on this when he spoke on the podcast a few weeks ago. They need to work out what do we stand for and who do we represent? Who of this sort of in the Liberal sort of mythology, who are the forgotten people of 2020's Australia?
He also will make that same point. This is Andrew Hastie. Made that same point at Four Corners program they did last Monday. So, again, clearly there are some within the Liberal ranks that know they are facing an existential crisis. It isn't, hyperbole. We're not sitting here as Labor biased commentators suggesting that this is something other than definitely something that they are going to have to tackle. But as, per our previous conversations on this subject, when you're only getting 1 in 5 Australians who are enrolling to vote to the tune of 700,000 every cycle, that is Gen Z, every 3 years, 700,000, and you're only getting 1 in 5 of them, you've got a problem.
Correct, and particularly in Victoria.
That's right. Yeah. Where it's not just 1 in 5, it's probably 1 in 6.
Yeah.
In Victoria.
There is Liberal soul searching, but, we spoke to Paul Strangio last week about this. They need to deal with the Howard legacy and Howardism, and I'm not seeing a hell of a lot of evidence of that. And that has come through at least in the mainstream legacy media. One of the big debates has been around Labor's reforms to superannuation. This is a policy which didn't emerge during the election. This is 2 years old. That there'll be changes to the concessional treatment of superannuation balances in excess of $3 million. But we have the likes of apparently Victoria's candidate for Goldstein, Tim Wilson, out and about attacking Labor for pursuing this reform. It's quite remarkable after a defeat of this size and import that they're sort of doubling down on this sort of
it isn't just
pro-boomer Howardistic style of politics.
The response to it, be it within parts of the media and obviously the party, the response to Chalmers' policy footing, announcement, but as you say, it's been in train for some time, is evident to me that everyone's ignored what drove that result on May the 3rd. The Labor Party now, this is the Albanese government, will be ruthlessly focused on locking in that emerging generation. And that generation thinks $3 million they're never going to have in their super balance. The most of these Australians that we're talking about, the ones that Labor is going to ruthlessly chase now to lock in for generations to come, their super balance is probably 50,000 right now. And that's right across, I would say, not just those in their late 20s, but those in their 40s and 50s. Their super balances are very meagre. The idea that, if you're in your late 20s, you're going to one day have $3 million in your account, it's laughable. And so who they're talking to? Who do they think is going to be, violently opposed to what Jim Chalmers is doing? Well, those voters, and yes, they're going to be young voters one day that will have 3 million in their account. But I'll put money on this reality. They're not voting Labor at the moment, nor the Greens or anything on the left side of politics.
Yeah, I mean, it's been quite farcical, really, and I think embarrassing. There's been a whole lot of ridiculous excuses put out there by the likes of Tim Wilson and Jeff Wilson, who was, of course, very active in the campaign against Labor's 2019 policies around negative gearing and capital gains tax reform. We're hearing that, the policy is going to force farmers to sell their land. It's going to sort of crush entrepreneurship in this country. It's going to kill, now we're hearing from the right that it's going to kill the building of renewables industry.
Here's their problem.
And they're telling young Australians that, they're going to be hit with a tax bill in 2060. We're talking about, let's be very clear about this. At most, we're talking about 80,000 super wealthy Australians who have these funds locked up in self-managed super funds. And what we know is that these funds are not being used to fund a decent, dignified retirement. They are being used as an intergenerational wealth transfer mechanism. That's right. They're basically mega trust funds.
Okay, so the lines around which institutions and organisations are going to be impacted by this. So the line around farmers. When the Australians that we're talking about, that of course Jim Chalmers and Albanese have got their eye on, hear that, their response, and I can tell you through the research we've done, is no. The problem Australian farmers have got is they're getting royally screwed by the big supermarkets. Now, whether that's right or wrong, that's the narrative out there. And so they don't believe for a minute that, you've got this narrative that farmers are doing it so tough that they need help and government handouts, in many cases legitimately so. And then the flip side to that is, by the way, they've got $3 million in a super account and they'll be impacted. Which one is it? Are they well off or they're not well off? Are they struggling or they're not struggling? Please let the Australians know. And this is the fundamental problem with those who
are trash, because there's trash around, indexation.
Yes,
as
correct.
Well.
Correct.
We don't income tax. It's not indexed.
No.
So, but they're looking for all sorts of excuses, and I actually think that they're heading down a very troubling path for another reason. If we can, let's be very clear about the changes. The changes are to tax concessions. Tax concessions. Okay, so this is like a free kick. We're saying you're not going to get as many free kicks,
which is fundamentally the epicenter of all young Australians' grievance about our economic system, that it's stacked against them. It gives too many free kicks to those who don't need them. And the coalition's, again, for finding itself in this environment where they are batting against the very generations that basically pummeled them into a large bus. I mean, it's effectively how many Liberal Party MPs you can actually fit into that have survived that federal election outside of Queensland.
And here's the real danger for them, Cos. So there's an equity argument, and also, with really serious structural budgetary pressures, yes, we should be looking for ways to make sure the tax system is working efficiently. Here's the other killer. The Liberals were big in the lead up to the last election about targeting suburban, outer suburban Australians, the so-called battlers. If we want lower income taxes, we have to curb these excessively generous tax breaks, concessions. So they're about to walk into a trap.
They already have. They already have. So one thing that we know about the election result is that Suburban Voters took one look at the opposition and said no in a very big way. And those outer suburban communities are diverse as well, particularly Melbourne and Sydney. They already have made up their minds. And what this narrative does is it continues on that brand that they've developed for themselves. That brand's been in the making now for a good 15 years. These Australians, most of them now in their 20s and 30s and 40s, have got a very strong view that the Liberal Party is not there for them. And that's the fundamental epicenter of their crisis right now.
Yep. And, there are legitimate debates to be had around indexation, okay? And it should be, whether it's in line with inflation, whether it's now or whether in 10 years' time, legitimate debates. There are legitimate debates around the threshold. The Greens want it to be at $2 million, but at least the Greens actually are people are in sort of inhabiting some form of reality here. What we know from the likes of Tim Wilson and others is they want to kibosh any reform here, and it is speaking to I think a form of denialism, and you've been watching quite closely some other sort of excuses and excursions into sort of fantasy land on the right of politics in the Twitter sphere and elsewhere. There's almost I keep saying George Christensen, the disgraced former LNP member, the member for Manila. He's been up and about really talking. When I sort of looked at it, I thought this is sort of great replacement theory. This is really dangerous for the centre-right of politics. And I just want to say something. People will say, because Nick have to, they're being partisan. No, we're not. I'm actually quite keen, and I make this point specifically in regards to Victoria. Australia needs a really competitive competitive system with the two majors, competitive, engaged in the battle of ideas. We haven't had that in Victoria for a couple of decades now. I want to see a match-fit Liberal Party who can hold the government to account, because I believe in democracy and accountability, and we're not getting that. We're not getting that when they're engaging in conspiratorial thinking around sort of great replacement theories.
Well, I mean, one of the theories out there is that the reason why the result was what it was on May the 3rd is because of the Albanese Labor government's immigration policy agenda in the first term, that they opened the floodgates and so on. Well, it takes about 6 years for someone to arrive to this country, gain permanent residency, eventually go through the process and acquire citizenships and then enroll to vote. So that's literally impossible. So what they're actually arguing is that the actual Morrison, Turnbull and Abbott government were the ones who flooded the country with migrants that assisted Labor. So they've got to make up their minds which one it is. But if you actually look at the stats of the last 6 years in terms of migration, the electorates that the coalition lost, the number of Australians that arrived to this country and have become citizens and have gained permanent residency, and they've jumped on the voters roll, they're in a couple of hundreds, the numbers. But they're also the least diverse electorates in the country. So the actual theory doesn't stack up at all. And if you actually look at the broader picture, Labor already holds most of the diverse electorates. It's held them for years. There's another story there to be had, another discussion there to be had about what's going on in diverse electorates, because that is a very volatile political environment for Labor, and we saw that express itself in some way at the recent federal election. But these seats are already locked up. They've been locked up for some time. The ones that are in play are not diverse, and you're not losing Dixon, Hughes, Leichhardt, those type of electorates because of migration. You're losing them because of some other reason, and we all know what that is.
Oh, go ahead, cuz.
Well, you're losing it because you basically are. We look at Dixon. You're being pushed out of urban Australia. Goes back to our initial point that we've been discussing, right? If you look at the state election results in the Queensland state election, Well, the state seats in Peter Dutton's former electorate now, they actually performed quite well for Labor in an environment where Labor was losing government, right?
Yeah.
So again, that was an ominous sign that we picked up on election night that something was going on there through Brisbane proper that I think, the coalition didn't spend much time investigating.
No, and whilst they're now sort of narrowcasting and obsessing about blocking superannuation, tax concession reform, they were absent from much of the economic debate in the previous 3 years, and once again they've absented themselves. There are huge debates taking, but the big debate, the big polls here in Australia needs to move on, and I think Labor's going to spend a lot of time across this next term of government attending to this problem is productivity. Productivity is at the root of, if we want to lift living standards and real wages, we've got to get productivity moving again. And again, for the Liberals, they're stuck in the mindset that the way to lift productivity is to have a leaner, meaner workforce.
So just on that, Labor needs to be careful when it uses language like that, productivity. It needs to find a different way of telling that story to the Australian public, because when we speak to Australians, when we say to them, well, what do you think of this term that, part of the solution to our economic problems is productivity. It needs to be increased and addressed and so on. Their view is, well, that's another word that's used that equates to me working longer hours, getting paid less, and getting exploited more. Yep. Productivity to me means the automation I see at my local supermarket is only going to get bigger. Productivity means to me that basically everything's going to get automated in warehouses, right? It's actually a bad word to use, because people at the moment think that when you are talking about that issue is really about making money for large companies and increasing the profit margins of large companies at the cost of the consumer and the worker.
Exactly, Cos, and this is something that the JCRC, we've got a productivity. Sorry, we're stuck with that word for the moment, Cos. It's certainly
another one.
Certainly in wonk world. Unless if you can invent a new word, perhaps drawing on classical Greek, we'll substitute it. But no, you're right. Well, we're stuck with that word, but one of the big things that this discussion paper that myself and Dominic Marr have worked on is we have to reimagine what productivity is in the 21st century. It has to mean growing smarter, not just faster. Productivity is about investing in capabilities and skills. It means, when we look at high tech things like AI, it has to be about enhancing, not replacing human labour. It has to be inclusive. It has to be regionally focused. It's got to be geared towards national resilience.
Productivity should be about at the forefront, at the head of the queue. The one thing that needs to be there is that whatever that means, the well-being of people needs to be at the forefront of it all. Well-being when it comes to, wage levels, quality of life, healthcare, mental health care. If you want to really genuinely increase productivity, get serious about mental health, right? It's all about these things, right? It's the care economy, for example, needs to be invested in a lot more. Now, I think Labor did a really excellent job there where during the federal campaign, they really narrowed down on health. It's probably the most unreported part of their campaign. They actually did all the heavy lifting for them. It showed the Australian public that they were trying to talk to that they had a empathetic heart. They cared about people. Yes, they let the ball drop, during the first term and didn't do enough in that space. But, they opened up with the Medicare reforms. They continued with investing in women's health, emergency care clinics, mental health announcement. Many people didn't pay much attention to this, but the doubling down on investing in men's health in particular resonated in the outer suburbs and regions. And of course, the new Albanese government, or part of that team, has Dan Ripicciolo now as the men's health spokesperson.
Yes, and he'll be coming on Curtins Cast in future weeks. It's a really good point you make about mental health. It's actually we've got sort of five pillars for 5 strategic pathways, and one of them is healthier workplaces. It's the low hanging fruit. Mental health. And also clean air. This is something which came out of COVID, and Dominic has written a lot about this. It's not just a public health imperative, it's a productivity reform which is hiding there in plain sight. If we have workplaces with better quality air quality, and if we can address mental health, then we're going to have safer workplaces, happier workplaces. We're going to have less labour shortages. We're going to have greater workforce participation. And, of course, if we can get that right, then there's going to be less strain on our healthcare systems. So I think, no, you're right. I mean, it's about reimagining what productivity actually is. And this is, I think, if Albanese Labor and, Jim Chalmers there in the forefront, they can get this right. This will be, this might be a really signature achievement. And it extends, AI is definitely part of,
You're going to be careful with
AI. No, but it's got to be. We're really clear. It's got to be about it's got to be putting people first, working people first.
The Australian public don't believe AI is positive.
That's good. That's right. But we've got to be big about it's augmenting human capability, and it's not about
right.
It's not about automating jobs or automating to cut labour costs. We should be using AI. In terms of mental health care, the other aspect I think of productivity, and this is something Andrew Hastie's spoke about, is it actually should be part of the idea of reindustrialising key sectors in the Australian economy. So one of the problems too, and there's interlinking problems here, is and this is why the Liberals obsessing about the superannuation is just political madness. This housing crisis. One of the ways we can actually address the housing crisis, also make sure that we're allocating capital to productive sectors of the economy, because housing isn't particularly productive. We should be looking at things like modular housing, so getting housing manufacturing, getting back into the game there, which would reindustrialise parts of the economy. There's a whole lot of things that we can be doing and talking about to drive productivity, which, I think I think Labor's in that space. For the Liberals, you've been big on this point.
Yeah,
they've got to slay some of those dragons at the moment. They're just sort of slaying each other, mate.
Yeah, just go quickly back to AI. So one thing this Labor government, any politician needs to be really careful about is AI equals automation. There's no evidence to the punter out there that this thing's a good thing. And the political class out there right now and parts of the media are walking around saying this is fantastic, it's going to reform X, Y, and Z. The lived experience for most Australians in the lower, I would say, end of our labour market is one of basically fighting against automation. And automation occurs because the boss wants to make more money. That's how people view it. So I think there's a lot of work needs to be done by anyone trying to sell AI as a positive tool, because at the moment that social license between AI and the public does not exist, has not been fought and won. So I'd be very careful if I was a Labor government talking anything in that space, because that's, as I said, social license has not been built.
Bang on, Cos. And I think it kind of leads me into the other big recommendation, something that I've been going on for a good decade. If you want to build that social license, if you want to harness AI to enhance worker autonomy, not undermine it, you actually have to have working people central to this discussion. So I'd like to have a renewed conversation about why can't we have elected worker employee representatives on the boards of mega companies? Why not?
Yes, well, I mean, look, will that again, this is the thing. Will that be to the advantage of the workforce? Possibly. Does Australians, particularly young Australians, massive cynicism about systems in general? Will these Australians think that, well, that's just going to get exploited or gamed, or someone's going to buy them off? I think it's a good concept, but again, I don't think that it's not something that I think the workforce out there thinks is the silver bullet.
No, well, I don't think we're arguing that it is a single bullet, but the advances in AI, it is classic example of an exponential technology, and it is increasing at such an exponential pace. But on the flip side of that, we are well behind in terms of investing in AI capabilities. Because we invest as a nation, we invest in AI and AI-related technologies less than the city of Ottawa in Canada each year. That's a national disgrace. So in some ways, some of my friends who are, I'm not a AI zoomer or doomer. I generally adopt a sort of healthy skepticism towards any new technology. But in some respects, as some of my friends point out, we're talking about sort of regulating AI when there is no substantial AI set of industries in Australia to begin with.
Yeah, so make one point clear. I actually think AI is great. But what I'm trying to do is just articulate to the listeners the social license challenges that are out there. And they exist, they're alive, and they will become politically problematic if attention in the social license space is not paid. If there's not enough attention being paid to the social license aspect of this discussion. Because the lived experience of automation, because that's how people think of AI, is one of negativity. No voter we ever speak to says, yeah, automation's been great. It's been great for me. No, it makes it easier for me when I go to the supermarket. If I've only got a few items to purchase, I'll just go to the self-serve section. And you go, well, do you like the self-serve section? Not really, because someone's lost their job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Part of this is also because it's not, AI has not been fed into the tertiary sector and the TAFE and vocational education sector whatsoever. You don't have a degree in AI specific technology. So no postgraduate and vocational pathways. But there is space to really open up the conversation. It should be regionally inclusive. We should have regional AI and automation, regional AI hubs which are linked to TAFEs and industry and universities. Part of the problem, and you're expressing it, is there's also a very inner urban mindset to AI. But we should be thinking outside the square and having the conversation and explaining how AI can help contribute to setting up smart irrigation systems in the Riverina. It can be used, for robotic mining safety systems. We can use AI-enabled technology to reboot manufacturing, things like the modular housing that I spoke about earlier, or advanced manufacturing in Geelong. There's a huge conversation to be had, but
be practical, right? And say AI can be used to enable apps to inform you if your local supermarket's ripping you off or not. Right?
I like that.
Right? That's like they could produce tools that protect you, the consumer, or protect you, the citizen. So AI could be an enabler in giving you the protection you think you don't have at the moment. So that, again, there's a way of doing this.
Correct, Mundo. There is now sort of increasing chatter around Labor's agenda. We've sort of got through the rough patch of the new cabinet, the new ministry being put in place. If you were there, I saw Paul Erickson was out there at the National Press Club. I'd encourage everyone to have a read of his speech. But if you were sort of in there at the coalface, what would your advice be to Labor to set up this term in government? What are the priorities for Cos Samaras over the next 3 years, which you're looking at not just from a policy perspective, but from a political perspective? Because I think there's a huge opportunity here. We've talked about some of the policies which might underpin that, but there's a huge opportunity to set up not just a third term, potentially a fourth term, and a long-term Labor government which can bed down big institutional and economic reform in the interests of working people.
Yeah, look, first and foremost, I think Paul Erickson was right. And the first thing straight off the bat for them is to implement what they promised the Australian public. That's the first layer. And then the second one, obviously, is convince a growing number of Australians that there is a political party that's in the business of attempting to remedy some of the intergenerational structural problems that are afflicting so many Australians at the moment. So the challenges are pretty big. And being timid is not going to wash in a second term. Look, I would say that it's highly likely that they'll get re-elected in 2028 purely because of demographics, but it wouldn't rule out more political volatile types scenarios where certain seats that should be stable and no longer stable. I mean, let's look at it this way. In Victoria, at the last federal election, that concluded on May the 3rd, Labor was basically funding every single seat it held, except for two, genuinely except for two. And those two were basically went down to the wire because they were exposed. There wasn't any funding for them. Those two historically been pretty solid, stable seats for Labor. So again, we're going to see more of those type of election outcomes where seats that historically have been very stable and are going to continue to become more volatile. If you want to fix that and you're on the Labor side of politics, you're going to have to get your skates on and get your skates on pretty quickly.
By the way, and a finishing point, Cos, can you give listeners a sense of, talking about going down to the wire, what's happening there's a couple of sort of teal
yes,
teal
Bradfield
and Goldstein. Tell listeners what's going on there.
So there's 3 real seats still being counted at the moment. You have obviously Bradfield. It's going to be a recount. That's like, I think the last time I looked at it with 3 votes with a difference. I joked on the weekend that perhaps one party or the other lost 3 votes. They decided that when they queued up, there was too many signs in their way and walked away. Then there's Goldstein, where Tim Wilson has won that seat by a few hundred votes. The threshold for recounts really under 100, and even then, the AC is pretty hard to convince.
Zoe Daniels has called for a recount. Can you maybe also explain the mechanics of how a recount actually works?
Yeah, a recount is basically recounting the entire ballot all over again and scrutinising every single ballot paper. Now, look, a recount
that margin they don't have to.
That's right.
The threshold is 100. Is that
that's 100's the threshold, and so even 100, I would, as a strategist, a past strategist, where I have been involved in. Bradfield's about to beat it. The closest result was in McEwen. I think it was 31 votes in 2007. We had a recount there. And then we also ended up in the Court of Disputed Returns for ballot papers that were ruled out informal, right? So that's where the dispute occurs. It doesn't occur in terms of you don't agree with the result. You just don't agree with certain ballot papers that have been ruled out. Now, in that count, that mattered because you're only dealing with 30-odd votes. 15 votes will flip it. Or 16. In Goldstein, 300 plus is just too big. So that's the situation. Then, of course, we've got the federal seat of Cornwall, where you have a very lengthy process underway. It's nearly concluded now. We were down to on Friday to the Greens, Independent Carly Moore, the Liberal Party, and Labor's candidate Bassem Abdo. The Greens have been excluded from the count now, and the majority of those preferences are going to Labor. That will probably get Labor very close to being elected, or elected actually once everything's done. And that's, I think, the remnants of that exclusion is occurring today. And then, of course, once that happens, Labor if Bassamad is not elected by the Greens' exclusion, the Liberals' exclusion will elect him, because basically Labor's getting at least 25% of that preference flow. So we expect it to be around 54-55 in favour of Labor's way there.
I think we can say to Bassam, who's a Palestinian Australian, he'll be the first Palestinian Australian hit polling. We can say Mabrouk, Alf Mabrouk, which means many 1,000 congratulations in Arabic. And I'm looking forward to Bassam making his mark in federal parliament.
The first Australian Palestinian in the federal parliament, and it's Labor that put him up there. And we may add, we'll wait until the dust is completely settled here, the Greens did not preference to him. They preferenced to a right-wing ticket that was opposing him. Fortunately for those who are concerned about the politics in this space, Green voters did not follow their how-to-vote card.
They never do.
They never do.
We'll be following this issue, I think, over coming months and years. Cos Samaras, thank you very much. Been a pleasure chatting to you as always. We've got some terrific guests coming up on Curtins Cast. Listeners, as a reminder, you can tune in. You're probably tuning in on Apple Podcasts, but you can also give us a whirl on Spotify and YouTube. And don't forget to remind a mate. But for now, that's it for Curtins Cast episode 14. Ciao and arrivederci.